Today's sponsor is Datadog, a real-time monitoring platform that unifies metrics, logs, and distributed traces from your cloud containers and orchestration software. Datadog's container-centric monitoring features allow you to track the health and performance of your dynamic container environment. The Container Map provides a bird's-eye view of your container fleet, and the Live Container View searches, groups, and filters your containers with any criteria, like tags, pods, or workspaces. To start monitoring your container clusters, sign up for a free trial today, and Datadog will send you a free t-shirt. Visit datadog.com/container-cloudcast to get started. That's datadog.com/container-cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it is the end of June. That is really hard to believe. And this is Aaron, by the way, for Cloud News this week. But before we get into Cloud News, I just wanted to briefly remind everyone we've got a great interview coming up. We're going to be talking with Jeff Hollan, Director of Product over at Snowflake, about Snowflake Data Cloud. We're going to be doing that right after the break. But first of all, let's jump into Cloud News. It's kind of a big week for both some acquisitions, but also Red Hat. Red Hat caused quite the waves in the industry. And actually, Cloud News leads to one article, and then that leads to another article, and I'm going to kind of summarize them both together. So first of all, would be last week, CentOS Stream will now be the sole repository for public RHEL-related source code releases. And a whole bunch of people lost their minds. And there was all kinds of accusations flying around, and RHEL is going to be closed sourced, and oh my gosh, there's no downstream anymore, and blah, 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 blah. And yeah, news like this, of course, is going to cause big waves in the industry, and maybe it wasn't communicated the best. Maybe it could have been a little more clear. There's, it's hard to necessarily pick a side on this one, but it was big enough that, at least as of recording this, on the 26th of June, Mike McGrath, who, by the way, he's the VP of Core Platforms Engineering at Red Hat, came out with another blog post and tried to clarify this a little more, tried to handle some of the confusion that has come up. Really at the end of the day, the second one was worded very strongly of all about the rebuilders, if you will, the downstream rebuilders, and taking the downstream, packaging it up, and making it their own, and or, RHEL customers that were out there that just didn't want to pay for RHEL. And it's going to have to change, right? And there's a certain amount of belt tightening that always happens in our industry. There's a certain amount of, things that just need to change over time. And this is, I don't want to say expected by any means, but I think this is one of those things that, as open source goes on, this is a change. And is it for the better or for the worse? I don't know that I can necessarily or should necessarily comment on something like that. But I think it's an evolution, without a doubt. Now, moving on to, we have two acquisitions that happened here. One of them, first of all, and this is probably the first of many, we're already starting to see some AI companies get picked up. And natural evolution on a lot of these things, right? A lot of startups go get a lot of funding. They go get build up products and go for big valuations. And then you start to see a consolidation in the industry. Well, Databricks announced that they're picking up Mosaic ML, which is an OpenAI competitor. Now, what's really interesting to me is they only took $64 million. And when they took that $64 million in the last round, their valuation was $222 million. And then they sold for $1.3 billion. So they 6x their last valuation. and just had a hell of an exit considering they only did 64 million in funding. So congratulations to the folks over at Mosaic ML. Of course, Databricks is going to continue to keep that company going, and hopefully good things will come out of that. We'll certainly keep an eye on it. But I found it super interesting to see we're starting to see some just crazy valuations and some crazy exits for AI already. And then in the other one that is getting a lot of news and attention is the cloud cost optimization arena. And IBM picked up Apptio. Now, they picked them up for up somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 billion. So a really, really big acquisition. This really made the rounds, and I think the price was surprising for a number of folks in the industry. But also, again, it goes to show you there is a lot of momentum and a lot of money to be made in cloud cost optimization. So with that, I'm going to wrap up cloud news for this week. And as I mentioned previously, coming up after the break, we're going to be talking to Jeff Hollan, and we're going to be talking about Snowflake Data Cloud.
Today's show is sponsored by Equinix. We all utilize multiple cloud providers, and we know they aren't built to work well together. Things get a whole lot more complex when your hybrid infrastructure needs to connect with your multi-cloud portfolio. Equinix is the world's digital infrastructure company, providing on-demand infrastructure in over 25 metros with hands-free provisioning and management, all connected to over 240 data centers and most major cloud providers. Equinix can help you deal with increasingly complex architectures, whether you want to run your favorite Kubernetes distribution or connect workloads between different cloud providers. To learn more, sign up at deploy.equinix.com and use the coupon code CLOUDCAST, CLOUDCAST, to get $500 in credits to get started today. That's deploy.equinix.com and use the coupon code CLOUDCAST and get those first $500 in credits today. And we're back. And folks, sometimes as Aaron and I are, mapping out the year, we're looking for topics, we're thinking about, what we want to do in the show, or even just do reviews of the year. We'll think through like, hey, what were the big topics? What are the companies that are, really driving change in the industry, that are doing really interesting things? And at one point, we were sitting there in January and we said, we've been doing this show for a long time. And even over the last 5 years, we have never had Snowflake on the show. And for all the companies in our industry, probably over the last 5 years, that have made just an enormous difference in terms of reshaping how people think about the cloud, how they think about data and analytics, and sort of that whole ecosystem. Snowflake has been really kind of an amazing story over the last 5 or 6 years, and just in terms of what feels a little bit like kind of coming out of nowhere. I know they didn't. The technology's really robust, but the fact that we haven't had them on the show is kind of what feels a little bit like a huge gap for us. And so we're very, very excited today to be able to fix that gap. And with that, really excited to have Jeff Hollan on with us, who's Director of Product at Snowflake. Jeff, welcome to the show, and thank you for finally allowing us to have Snowflake on the show.
Hey, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks so much for the invite. Excited to talk a little bit more about Snowflake and some of the trends we're seeing.
Yeah, and we're gonna dig in a little bit. Snowflake Summit is going on right now. It's kind of late June. So we're going to talk about some of the announcements there. But first, before we dive into that, give us a little bit of your background, as well as the areas that right now you're focused on at Snowflake and with Snowflake partners and those types of things.
Yeah, so right now, as you mentioned, Director of Product, and my team focuses on all things developer ecosystem and the set of technologies in Snowflake that we call Snowpark, which you can almost think of as like the developer runtime and libraries and really everything non-SQL. So all the stuff where often when you think about Snowflake, you might think of it in terms of the data itself and querying the data often with SQL. But there's a huge amount of functionality you can do beyond just SQL, Python, Java, Scala. So everything in that world is what I'm focusing on. And partly that's less surprising when you do learn a little bit more about my background. So prior to Snowflake, I was at Microsoft, actually working in the Azure cloud for a number of years, about a decade at Microsoft. Most recently, I was running the portfolio of products around PaaS and serverless and containers. So Azure serverless functions, containers, websites, that suite of products in the Azure cloud world, doing some stuff with Kubernetes. But saw what was happening around data and applications. And I was like, I want to try this over here now for the data cloud.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. And that's obviously a space, the entire ecosystem around developers is, we always tend to lump it as developers, but it is really, really broad, really robust. There's niches in there. So yeah, I can imagine, moving from something in which you were enabling developers to now being able to do the applications plus where everything is in data is very, very exciting. For those, as I mentioned, we've been remiss in talking to the broader Snowflake ecosystem. For folks that aren't as familiar with it or know the company, but maybe aren't as intimate with kind of all the breadth of what Snowflake does in the data cloud, kind of give us a 50,000-foot picture of you talked about Snowpark, but folks said like, hey, what all is Snowflake these days? Kind of give us a 50,000-foot level before we dive into some of the other things today.
Yeah, and as mentioned and as you've talked about, I think the biggest thing to think about is this notion of data cloud more than just any specific workload. And that's really where Snowflake is about. From a fundamental standpoint, Snowflake is all about trying to find ways to mobilize the world's data and remove silos around data. And there's a million reasons that those often get formed. So it's how can I securely store my data? How can I query that data? Some of those traditional data and database style workloads is absolutely core to it, but also expanding beyond into things like data engineering, where you need to process and clean or transform your data, to data science, to applications that run alongside the data, or even cybersecurity. Like some workloads that folks are often surprised to realize you can do with something across like a data cloud that Snowflake does are things like data clean rooms, where you might want to interact or engage with a partner. Maybe you're I work with a partner right now who's in the retail business, and they work with advertising partners, and the advertiser has some data and the retailer has some data. How can they collaborate with each other without sharing data that they're not authorized to share, like personal identifiable information? So all of the building blocks you need to do all of those things are what encompasses in the data cloud, all through a single platform that's multi-cloud as well. So one of the cool things when you sign up or start using Snowflake, it asks you a question like, hey, do you have a preference on what cloud you want us to run your stuff in? AWS, Azure, GCP. Once you make your selection and you can have a single account that spans multiple, you're off to the races. You have everything that you need to just start running and building solutions on top of data. So a pretty exciting solution that builds at that data cloud layer.
Right. Yeah, no, that's cool. And everybody I've ever talked to that's been a customer of Snowflake, it always seems like the level of passion around loving the product is similar to like Apple, which is very unusual in sort of the enterprise IT space. So that's always very cool. But also just, they just go, I don't really have to think about all that stuff I used to have to think about, like partitions of data and locations of data. And, am I going to have too much there to keep up with? So yeah, I think the foundation of what you've built is awesome. And now the question becomes like, well, what can you do on top of that when you have this gravity of what's there? And I think that kind of leads us into this idea, and we've heard it back and forth in multiple ways. We've heard, bring data to the applications, bring the applications to data. I know there's different, connotations and so forth. What does that mean though? Like when people are talking about the importance of, let's say, bringing applications to the data, what are, beyond just the purely technology and locality of it, like what are the business ramifications of being able to be as close as possible with your applications, being able to have some mobility or not have to think about locality? What does that mean from a business context?
The thing that I hear most frequently from customers that I talk to around why even this conversation of kind of applications and data exists, why is there inertia, as you mentioned, to bring those two closer together? One of the core pieces of motivation has to do with governance and security. So when you think about one of the things Snowflake is very proud of and makes a lot of noise around is a huge amount of its customers are those top 2,000 companies in the world, the massive global 2,000 industries. When you think about the data that those folks have, it is incredibly valuable to them as a business. Like that data is the lifeblood of the business. So
Sure.
They have a lot of controls and governance to make sure that data is kept safe, secure, for regulatory compliance, you name it, that data is precious. And so whenever you think about this notion of, let's say you are using Snowflake today, and you set up Snowflake in a way so that only the right people have access to the right data, maybe specific roles even have, a filtered view of a specific table. And now you have an application that needs to have access to that data. Maybe it's a partner application, maybe it's some ML model, maybe it's a web application, you name it. As soon as you pull that data out of Snowflake, you now have to answer all of those same questions again somewhere else. So somebody in the enterprise is probably pulling their hair out trying to figure out, well, shoot, what happens now once my data leaves where it's going and goes somewhere else? How do I make sure it has the right control, governance, auditing, you name it? That is a really powerfully motivating factor to say, can you provide a consistent spot across the applications and the data itself for me to just govern and manage and maintain this, so I don't feel like I have to compromise on that? I think that's a huge one. From a technical standpoint, as you mentioned, price performance is a big motivator. The less the data has to move, the more you're saving both in time, but also cost. But as I mentioned, I think the one I hear the most is anytime that data leaves where it's stored, there's a lot of eyeballs that have to go onto it. And people would love to just keep that agility without having to worry about compromising on that security.
Yeah. No, it makes a ton of sense. And especially when you think about it in that broader context of not just like, technically where's my application, but all the things that are kind of dependent and somewhat attached loosely or directly attached to that. You guys just announced what sort of something called Snowpark Container Services to run these applications locally. And we've been fascinated with seeing more and more of the cloud services sort of get away from the idea of, compute is this siloed thing to where, compute becomes a native service within, different cloud services. Talk a little bit about what this Snowpark container service does, what it's intended to do, and kind of the scope of it.
Yeah, it's really a factor of exactly what we were just talking about in saying, for a while now, actually last year when we did our summit event, the big announcement was around Python and the ability to run Python code natively within Snowflake. At the time in public preview, that's now gone to general availability, which opens up a ton of workloads. But as you've discussed even on this podcast before, there's certain pieces or even certain workloads that can't all just be handled by writing a Python script or a Python program. So Snowpark Container Services really drastically expands those type of application workloads that we can run within Snowflake. So now either an end user directly can say, hey, here's this application that I have that I'm able to stick into a container. Containers have just become the standard way of building cloud native apps to begin with. And we will go and securely run and host and scale and patch and maintain that container right next to your data. It's really exciting to see, we've had some private preview customers who write a little bit of logic. They stick it in a container and then they go scale it against a query of hundreds of thousands of millions of rows. And Snowflake will just scale the container and process next to it. So very exciting. And then the other element, which I'll call out here as part of Snowpark Container Services, one part is definitely the, hey, I'm a data scientist or an application developer. I've written some logic that makes sense to host and run and scale next to the data itself. But the other part we're really, really excited about is that this also enables partner solutions to run next to the data. So we were able to co-announce this week, and you should check out these demos for anyone listening if you haven't before, a ton of different partners who've gotten their solutions that can now run natively inside of someone's Snowflake account. So one of the demos that I was able to just show was Hex. If you haven't seen Hex before, they're a Snowflake partner. They've got this great notebook experience, like building a data Jupyter-style notebook. They can now run that application suite end-to-end inside of somebody's Snowflake account powered by these Snowpark containers behind the scenes. So the ability to bring these application workloads, but really opening up that ecosystem to say, hey, if you want access to these awesome partner solutions, you name it, you can now run those without having to worry about, so where exactly does my data go? And do I lose control of it? No, it's all running there in your Snowflake Data Cloud.
Yeah, no, and it's powerful, obviously, for the ecosystem, but it's also super powerful for, a couple of reasons. One, if it's in your account, you've got all the native controls that are already there. So you don't have to think about like, okay, am I poking a hole through something? Am I opening a port? And the other thing I have to imagine is you're not having to worry about like, okay, where is where is the data accessed? Where's the application running? Am I crossing like intra or inter-region boundaries? I'm going to pick up I'm going to pick up a networking charge and so forth. So yeah, that simplicity is very, very powerful. I want to talk about, we're so far into the show, we haven't talked about sort of the topic du jour, which is around AI and ML, everybody's favorite buzzword these days. I'm really curious what Snowflake's take on that is, because to a certain extent, we're now seeing these really powerful things happen when you can apply models and logic and simple user interfaces on top of tons of data. But to a certain extent, most of the interesting demos that have been out there and services that are being showed are kind of on the public internet. And I'm curious what you guys are starting to see or hear from customers and from the ecosystem, the community about like, hey, we want to be able to do that on our data. And I imagine that's a problem that you guys are very interested in helping solve, but also a problem that customers are looking for some guidance around.
A ton. And as everybody knows, and it's actually amazing how long this has stayed in the public consciousness of, there was that light bulb moment across the world really when ChatGPT came out and everybody saw, hey, there is a step change improvement coming with these LLMs and the ability to just be the next big platform disruption. That even I personally, I don't know, Brian, if you've had a chance to play with some of these things, like the types of apps that you can start to build, it's really exciting. But to your point, when I start to think about this in reality and production workloads, and especially enterprise data, very quickly, to your point, it becomes, hey, I'm a little bit anxious of where exactly is my data going? Who is using the data? Are they going to be using our proprietary data to do training or whatnot? So how can we bring some of that same control and governance across those same data cloud promises? So I'm really excited about what Snowflake is doing here. Honestly, we've been in the ML and data science space for a while, and even things like Snowpark container services and the strategy predate that light bulb moment of November. But the timing could not have been better. So one of the other big things we showed here, and part of this includes a partnership we announced with NVIDIA AI GPUs and intelligent infrastructure, is the ability to run those same LLMs for an enterprise within your Snowflake account and use your data against them to make them smarter. So I get the nice plug here of the demos that I showed, and you can see both these on YouTube. We'll link to them into the show notes. The other big demo we showed in our opening keynote was taking an LLM and first discovering it in the Snowflake marketplace. So having the Snowflake marketplace not just be a great place for you to find other data sources or even other applications, but also a marketplace of these models and LLMs. Finding an LLM, being able to provision it to run entirely within your Snowflake account, and then fine-tuning it with your data. So the story we took was, hey, this LLM knows a lot about products, but what if it actually knew about our product naming and our product IDs? And so we fine-tune that LLM with NVIDIA AI infrastructure, and now you can run this against your data in full control. It's really, from a technical standpoint, is almost basic as that seems. I'll just highlight there's a lot of moving pieces in there, because if you imagine just in what I've just described, the customer here, like me, the consumer, I need to be able to have full control over what data is going in the LLM itself and making sure it never leaves the boundary. At the same time, these LLM providers, Reka was the one we highlighted, they need to make sure that their IP is protected. They want to make sure that their LLMs aren't getting leaked and that the consumer doesn't have access to them, because that's their IP. That's what they've been working so hard to do. So we built up this mutual platform to be able to run things like LLMs and really provide the industry's first enterprise grade platform for running LLMs against your data. So super excited about those combining of these announcements with this huge platform revolution happening around LLMs.
Yeah, I'm curious. So, you've been around cloud for a while. I've been around for a while. I feel like we're going to run into kind of a similar thing. So I know you remember the days when, CIO, CEO would go to some event and they'd be talking about cloud computing, right? And it was always sort of framed as like, IT, your current IT is holding you back. You need to be a digital company. You need to move to the cloud. And we were seeing all these, kind of interesting things. Oh my gosh, I can get stuff on demand. I don't have to pay for it as CapEx. And you were seeing people come back and go, all right, we're going to become a cloud first company. You guys have to figure out how to move to this model. I have to imagine the new sort of AI models are probably starting, especially in your world, people coming back and going, I just want that right now. And it's got to be a little bit challenging for, larger organizations or organizations that, are in regulated industries or other things to go, okay, how do I get there? Like, what's the best practice? What's the fast lane, but also some guardrails around it? Like, what are you hearing in terms of how organizations are trying to figure out the balance between, God, there's all this potential, but at the same time, I also don't want to end up on the front page of CNN or the Wall Street Journal or Hacker News because we forgot to put some guardrail, some control on it. Like, what are you seeing in terms of the balance there?
I think your analogy is spot on. I've actually spent a fair bit of time over the last few weeks just brushing up and reminding myself of against some of these other big platforms across, the mobile development age. You mentioned cloud, the internet itself, and kind of seeing a lot of this is cyclical. And I think as you call out, we'll see some of those things repeat. Of course, like many of these things too, it's making sure that you're being very thoughtful about how you're approaching. The good news here, though, is I do think that there's a few areas that are very safe bets that while there's a lot, we don't quite know of where everything is going to shape out. The best strategy to help feed any data, AI, or ML strategy is just going to be a good data story. Like if you don't have your data in order, if your data is siloed, if it's hard to access, if it's hard to discover, whatever new amazing stuff that's popping up, it's going to be hard to take advantage of. And maybe if we're using the cloud analogy, I think the evolution of DevOps along with cloud adoption really went hand in glove because, yeah, you can say we're going to move everything to the cloud, but if you just do the cloud thing and you don't rethink some of how you're organizing and releasing stuff, you're going to end up on one of those front page stories or whatever else.
Yeah.
So, a very safe place to start is just really thinking and figuring out, am I built on a data cloud platform that's giving me the spot to get things in order while things start to move very, very quickly? And really what motivates me, and I know the rest of the team here at Snowflake, and one of the core principles that attracted me to Snowflake to begin with is this mindset of we really want to provide the phrase that we'll sometimes use, and hopefully this isn't lost on folks listening, is like a pit of success experience, meaning just by default, if you just go about things and you try to get them working, let's say try to get an LLM working against your data, we're going to make this a streamlined and simple experience where you end up in a spot of success and best practices by default. You almost have to struggle. You have to try to get something built in an inoptimal way around price, performance, security, you name it. And I think that's a lot of what's motivating even some of the sentiment that you talked about at the top of the show. So there's a lot happening. It is very exciting. But I think as well, I think you're right to call out that, hey, like all things, there's going to be a bit of a hype cycle. There is absolutely strong truth to this. I can't remember the last time I saw this much excitement, this much customers immediately seeing value, really since I think it's like mobile and apps, like that big disruption or cloud even. So I'm very excited about it, but you do have to take a bit of a pragmatic approach. So at the very least, focus on getting a good data story.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you one last question because obviously you guys are slammed with all this stuff going on. We do this thing with developers where we go, oh, they're developers, and we mentioned that early in the show. They're not all the same. It's not all the same language. We tend to do that sometimes with data where we're like, oh, it's data. It's in a database, but obviously, there's differences between stuff that's in structured, queryable databases, stuff that's, streaming, and, obviously things like documents are, massive parts of organizations. It could be PDFs. It could be what people create. Like, do we have to think about those differently? I know we think about them, sometimes there's different access methods for them, but in terms of, how you guys think about it in terms of the data cloud, how do you, add value for those applications? Do things like, documents, for example, have special use cases, or are there, kind of advancements that are happening there that maybe are different than somewhere else?
For sure. I think there is one of the big eye-opening things for me coming, as I mentioned, from this very big app dev container Kubernetes space and then jumping with both feet into the data cloud world. I guess actually the surprise is how common and how much these worlds are merging. In fact, one of the things that I noticed of the reasons that, I have a lot of great things to say about previous roles that I've had, and I really enjoyed my time at Azure. But one of the things that I was even noticing in that role was the lines were starting to blur. Like maybe an example is I remember when I was first working on like websites hosting in the cloud, you would have the canonical developer, like developer in this bucket, and they'd be like, I'm going to build a website. And at some point of building it, they're like, I guess I need a database for the website because I have to like store users or products or whatever. So, I'm 2 days into this. I'll go dust off whatever my database of choice is, Postgres, SQL, you name it. But as we got further along and moving into the 2020s, far more people were approaching serverless and apps by saying, I have a bunch of data and really a bunch of value that's coming from the data. So now I'm actually looking to build apps or serverless functions off of that data. And sometimes these would be personas that I would traditionally think of as like the database person. It's like, wait, you're coming and knocking on the door. And it's one of the reasons that I was like, I think I want to jump into this. And just seeing that again, so much at Snowflake is the ecosystem is evolving so much. Data and that data gravity is just becoming so much more powerful with things like the AI and data science revolution and the ability to find that value from the data. And from that, these lines are really starting to blur. I was on a call earlier this week with a data analyst who spends all of their time writing SQL. And they were talking to me about how desperately they need things like configuration as code and Git integration and all these other platform features that we've announced and working on. Like the lines are very much blurring here. I'm very interested what the world's going to look like 5 years from now in terms of even some of these persona buckets that we have, from citizen developer to database person to document manager. It's all kind of just starting to, I guess, combine, but at the same time have their own unique needs. So it's an exciting time, but I think data is more important than ever.
Yeah, no, good stuff. Good stuff. Well, Jeff, listen, I know you guys are swamped with all this. Thank you so much. First off, thank you for us finally kind of breaking the seal and having Snowflake on. It's been great to watch the company grow, but it's really exciting to see what feels like sort of the next phase of you guys expanding broader ecosystem, AI and ML, different types of applications. If folks, obviously, we'll put a bunch of links in the show notes to things that have been announced and demos and stuff. If folks, what's the best way if people are like, hey, I'm still sort of new to this space. I want to get engaged with the team. Like, what's the best place to go? Is it just snowflake.com? Are there good starting points for people to get to learning on things?
Depending on where you want to start with, snowflake.com is great. The docs.snowflake.com. There's even, if you consider yourself more of the developer side, we just revamped the developer space. For me personally, though, the one I would plug, I really love quick starts. Like for me, I learn best I can read docs, I can look at marketing, whatever else, but until I try stuff out. So my personal plug would be go to quickstarts.snowflake.com. And that will jump you into, I don't know, there's a couple, I would say 100 at this point, maybe more, of just little things that you can go spin up a free trial account, try it out, see for yourself. A lot of what we talked about today, like Snowpark Container Services, is in private preview, but a lot of what we talked about, Snowpark, Data Cloud itself, is ready to go. So my plug would be go try it out, quickstarts.snowflake.com.
Awesome. Good stuff. Well, look, folks, with that, we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank Jeff so much for his time, for educating us and opening that door for us. Go check it out, especially around the quick start stuff. We'll put a bunch of links in the show notes so you don't have to remember the links. With that, I'm going to wrap it up. I want to thank Jeff again for his time. Folks, thanks for listening to the show. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the community. And with that, we'll wrap it up and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.